Hello, people. My name is Byron Rufio. Welcome to my space. Today we have a special guest who is going to share with us her book and her website because here during the pandemic we have seen in Central America that suicide rate have increased because people sometimes feel that they need to share and hug and all the things that has been forbidden for this pandemic. So I have decided to invite my friend Debbie, and Debbie Edwards is going to share with us her book. Her book, you can find her book here in doroteaandsoy.com, and I'm going to share my screen. I don't know if you can see my screen. Yes, it is being shared. Okay, so here is Dottie Edwards, Bipolar Power. So during this pandemic, we have seen that bipolar diagnosis has been increased in these local statistics because, as I said, people feel that they need to share hugs and communicate with their relatives, and sometimes because of the local policies about the restrictions of this COVID pandemic, people feel that it's better not to go to visit to their relatives because they fear that somehow they're going to get infected. So these have created an increased rate in suicide thinking. So we have been thinking about how to share the best approach or methodology for people who have, for some reason, bipolar disorder. So with no more um questions about this, we are going to introduce Dorothy Edwards, who is going to share her thoughts and how we can deal with this pandemic and isolation and with the bipolar thoughts that some of us may have because of this situation. So, okay, Dorothy, this is your time.
Okay.
Welcome. What can we learn about your website?
Well, I like to say thank you so much for allowing me this space and opportunity to speak with you and to speak with your audience because I think that this is a very critical and necessary time to talk about mental illness as a whole and not just bipolar disorder. So, if I had to first talk about myself, I'm actually from the United States of America, Michigan. I'm from the state of Michigan, and I have two sisters, one younger and one older, and I came from a home and an area that is poverty stricken. So I come from a place that is very poor. But I've been blessed with the opportunity to progress and to go and to get a couple degrees, and then now I live in the state of Texas. So the reason why I wrote the book is called Bipower, and I wrote the book because I have a bipolar disorder diagnosis. And I realized there are so many people who have thought to commit suicide because of depression, because of anxiety, or any of those mental health related issues. And I think a book like this will be critical because it helps them to see themselves in my story. So I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was in college, and of course, most times any mental illness can be stemmed from, it can be genetic, or it can be stressors that actually trigger it. And I think in this whole pandemic environment, there are stressors because you really can't go outside the way that you want. You really can't see family members the way that you would desire. So that induces a level of stress. And I think my situation that was surrounded around why I developed my book is because I was in a deep sense of stress when I actually got diagnosed. So I always want to share with you to read my book because you'll find your story within my story.
Hi. Okay, well, that sounds great, but let me ask you, how old were you when you had this bipolar disorder diagnosis?
I was about 21. I was in college.
All right, and what do you think was the trigger of this bipolar disorder?
I was actually in the imagine, and I was staying up very, very late and waking up very, very early. And with a person that's has a history of mental illness in her family, any type of break in your schedule, the mind requires a certain schedule that you wake up and go to sleep at certain times. And I was going to sleep late, waking up early, so I was breaking that mental cycle, and that kind of triggered it for me, and then the natural stressors that were going into being a college student and things like that. So that is one of the main things that kind of triggered it, lack of sleep.
Hmm. Let me ask you something. At some time, did you feel at any level that you needed to hurt yourself in order to feel great about your bipolar disorder? I mean, people tend to think that bipolar disorder is very related with suicide thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like some sort of demon comes from our inner self. I mean, a lot of science have made studies about this. I mean, esotericism is one of the forbidden science that the Freemasonry studies, and it is related with a topic related with a fight between a mammal, which would be represented by a gorilla or a monkey, and a snake. And that represents like the union that we have at the moment of birth, because the snakes will represent the male part of us, which will be the brain and the spinal, uh, and the heart will be represented by the mother, and our arms on our legs. So sometimes they say that the bipolar disorder is because there is a conflict between the male part of our inner self
Mm-hmm.
and the female part of our inner self. I mean, the male part analyze phenomena and rationalize things. And that is why some philosophers think that it is governed by fear. And in the opposite way, uh, we could say about the mother's perspective, it is governed by the heart, the feelings, and sometimes there is a conflict between our father inner self and our mother inner self, and that is why it is produced this bipolar disorder. So, what do you think about this?
That's a different way of thinking about things. I've never thought about it in that way. Mental illness is associated with the brain chemistry, right? So, and the neurotransmitters in your brain, has to function properly, and the reasons why it's not functioning properly is so hard to pinpoint. I never thought about it from a religious standpoint, but I do think that it involves the brain. It involves, if you're stressed, it's going to impact your brain. If you're happy, it's going to impact your brain. And if you're really stressed and depressed, then that what takes you into the point of feeling like you want to be commit suicide and things. I've never felt like I wanted to commit suicide, but I have felt like I wanted to die. And that's two different things. I never felt like I should harm myself, but I have felt that my life was so horrible, so bad. I felt like I was hopeless and helpless. And as a result of feeling that way, I was like, oh my God, I just wish I wasn't here. What's the point of me being here? What's the point of me living? So yeah, I've experienced that, although I haven't experienced feeling like I need to commit suicide. And I think most people, they get to a point, and even this pandemic, where you're not able to have the liberties or the freedoms that you would want. So it's like you feel like you're held captive. You feel like you're in some sense of you in prison or in some type of jail. So I can understand why people would feel as if, hey, my life isn't the way that I would want it to be, and things like that. And this book is helpful because it paints a picture of why I walked the path of not feeling like life was the best for me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let me show you something here. I'm going to present something here. Do you see my screen over here?
Yes.
All right. Well, this is a symbolic Freemasonry chart which represents two columns. One
Hmm.
column is column called column B and column J. And they say, according to ancient philosophical traditions, that it is related with the Jewish. I don't know if you have heard about this, but in the Bible mythical history of Daniel, I mean, back in 600 BC,
Hmm.
this king from Babylon, calling Nebuchadnezzar,
Hmm.
invaded Jerusalem.
Hmm.
So during that time, the king was Joaquin. That was his name. So the point is with the letter J, which represents Joaquin, who was the king of Israel at the time when Jerusalem was invaded by Babylon. It fulfilled a period of 600 years that started with Boaz. And Boaz was the guy where Ruth, I mean, in the Bible, the history
Yeah.
of Ruth, this
Hmm.
girl, this Jewish girl, fall in love with Boaz, right? And according to the Bible, she got married with him, and this guy was a Persian guy, and she was a Jewish princess. So they established some sort of relation, which ultimately which in beneficial for the Jewish people because she delivered herself to this Persian king in order to save the Jewish people. And that is why her history is recorded in the book of Ruth in the Bible. So there, according to history, was Israel started to flourish. And actually, it flourished with a lot of kings during 600 years until the very end, which was with the king Joaquin, and he suffered the invasion of Nebuchadnezzar. So they represent both columns, Joaquin and Boaz, the beginning and the end of the Jewish economy and dominion over Eastern civilization in Jerusalem. All right. The point is that during that time, according to scholars, this is like some sort of representation between the conflict of the celestial or the star mechanical of the
Hmm.
of the heaven with the earth, because according to this, every time Jupiter uh, intersects with Saturn and Venus, this kind of conflict happens. I mean, the last time that we have the conjunction between the star Jupiter, Saturn, and Venus, like we had last December 21st of 2021, we have the Belém star. I mean, the last time we saw that star was during 1187 AD in Jerusalem, where we have the historical scenario of the Crusades War. So before that, when we had the same star, well, at the beginning of Christ. So what I'm saying is that this star, all right, which is not an actually star because it's a combination of three stars: Saturn, Jupiter, and Venus. So those three elements are mixed in the heaven sky, and they appear to be like one star, but they are actually three stars. So when this conjunction happened, the first time uh, the Jewish people got invaded by the Babylon Empire. The second time we saw this star was at the beginning of Christianism, because that was the start that, according to the Bible, uh, announced the birth of Christ. And then we saw the stars in the Crusades. And then we saw the star last year, 2021, December 21st. So, what I'm saying is that maybe because this star appeared, some people may think that it is related with the conflict between the two pillars of
Hmm.
our temples, which are the male part and the female part. So, do you think
Hmm.
that actually stars could influence this conflict within ourselves? Because we are living in a conflict. I mean, socially, we are divided between East and West, and that conflict sometimes can be taken to the inner self, and that is why sometimes it can be related to the increase of suicide thinking because there is a conflict between the opposite of ourselves, the positive thinking and our negative thinking. So,
Hmm.
what do you think about this?
I think it's a very different way of thinking about things. So when I think about, I see it's hard for me to view that, a woman has its dominant side of itself and it has its feminine side of itself. So those two sides within one person can be at odds. In my mind, I just see me as just a woman and I don't have any aspect of a man to me, so in my mind there could be no conflict in that way because I only have that feminine piece of me and not that masculine male type of piece to me. But I do understand that any conflict within yourself can impact the brain, right? And if something impacts the brain, it impacts your actions and it impacts your emotions. So yeah, I never really thought about how it connects with stars and things, but it's interesting to hear. Definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, let me show you something here. For example, if we see a snake, some people compare a snake with,
When I think about a snake, I think about wickedness.
yes. But let me show you something. These are pictures of sperm, and some
Mhm.
people compare that with snakes
Mm.
because they say, well, ultimately, we are like this. Because, for example, let me show you something. Right. Do you see this? I mean, this could be compared with a snake or with a sperm. So it means that right now, even though we have legs and arms, but our brain or our spine are like the basis of our existence because it is based on what we used to be, which is this, right? So in that way, we have never stopped being this. I mean, it looks like a snake. So according to some philosophical thinkers, they say, well, this is the basic organism. This is the basic shape of evolution. So, what happened here in this dimension where we're living is because there is actually a union, because there is a mixture between this. Let me show you something. The and the female part, right? Because when women got pregnant, for example, this is what happens. I mean, only one of them is going to fertilize the women eggs, or so to speak. So we are a combination of this contradiction, and this aspect will behave in a way for emotions, but this other element will behave in a rational thinking. And that is why our brain and our spine define our rational thinking, and our heart define our emotions,
Awesome.
right? So what ancient Jewish thinking philosophers thought about this mixture is that we are a combination between uh, emotions and rationalism, right?
Hmm.
So our emotions comes from our mother side, and our rational thinking comes from our father side.
Hmm.
And they said that then the suicide thinking is related with divorce. For example, here in Guatemala, the I mean the divorce rate has been increased with this pandemic situation. And there is psychological studies that have been addressing this issue in order to understand the roots of this. So they say that when people got in a place with the partner, 24 hours, sometimes the routine can become exhausting, and stress can increase. Sometimes the uh, difference between our male part and our women part. So when that complex, when that difficult or combination of contradiction is unsustainable, then is where suicidal thinking start to arise. So what I'm saying is that is a conflict between our rational thinking and our emotional thinking. So, for example, if we are talking about divorce, well, some people think that uh, rationality is related with stability, with incomes,
Yeah.
right? But maybe the emotions will betray that because you are attracted to someone which is not your companion.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a conflict because you want something, but you don't want that at the same time. And some philosophers think that it is between it is because there is a conflict between our male part and our female part. The male part maybe wants to have an adventure outside the marriage, and the female part would like to be more conservative in order to preserve family, right? So that is what have been established during some studies that have been developed here in Central America in order to understand why the suicide thinking have been increased during the pandemic. So, what do you think about this?
um, I don't know. It's a very different way of thinking. I just
Uh-huh.
never thought of a specific gender two parts
Mhm.
of themselves, but I do see the correlation between, um, you know, people that when they divorce, I see the correlation between, I understand the reasons why, the example that you use in terms of, maybe the male, wants to venture off, and then that's that female who, is more conservative. And I just think, I don't know, I think our emotions play a role in anything that we do in life. And I
Uh-huh.
think no matter how we view it, whether it's, female or male parts, it always relates back to emotions, and I think, I guess, those two parts of us, when they're at odds, it creates, a conflict, which would naturally cause, emotions to go the way that it shouldn't go, which would then impact the brain. So I can kind of see that. It's a very different approach and a different thought process, but I can kind of understand it a little bit.
Mhm. Yes, I mean, let me tell you. I mean, I'm sure that every one of us sometimes have had this suicide thinking because there is a conflict between uh, something around us or within ourselves. I mean, there is something that uh, we don't we feel that we don't belong to this place, or we feel that there is something out of place, but something triggers the suicide thinking. What I'm saying is that, in my opinion, according, I mean, I was a Mormon bishop, and I have heard stories about all the people that came to me. I was a bishop for 3.5 years, so I was used to deal with confessions of several people who came to me in order to get guidance from a spiritual guide. So I was supposed to be the spiritual guide, right? So I was 26 years old, and I give advice to people according to the best I thought it was the best solution for their particular case. And I tend to make interviews with young people, student of the church, because they needed to present a good grade of philosophical thinking and spiritualism, because they had a Sunday meeting class that they had to attend in order to be able to go to the temple. I mean, in the Mormon church, we have three kind of buildings. The first type of building is to go just every Sunday, worship God and sing some hymns, and I mean, have the meeting with the word where you're living.
Mhm.
The second kind of building is where they have several wards. I mean, those are called stake buildings. The their capacity is around 1,000 people, divided between 6 wards, for example. So it happens like 4 times during the year. So all the local people look for this moment, because when this moment happens, they have a lot of social activities, such as entertaining and selling things. And I mean, there is a whole community over there. And what I'm saying is the social structure over there is very tight, because everyone knows each other. And sometimes we have the situation where someone, for some reason, got divorced, or for some reason is in in a situation where he have alcohol consumption or drugs or something. So it is difficult, because in this society of the Mormon church, you need to be perfect. And if for some reason you are not perfect, it's because you are a sinner, right?
Mm, okay.
And being a sinner, it means that you are not following God's order. So here we have seen suicide thinking increase, mostly during the, I mean, among the Mormon church followers, or other Christian denominations, because they think that the Bible says that if you are a bad person, you are going to hell. And
Mhm.
if for some reason you got divorced, or for some reason you are not worthy to hold a temple recommendation, the whole community sees you as the black sheep, right?
Mm,
And you don't want to be the black sheep, because nobody wants to be around you, right? And that may increase the suicide thinking.
yeah.
So, what advice would you suggest to someone who feels that has been labeled as a black sheep among his, his community?
I think that they should first um And if I guess someone who's a black sheep, I would say that the person has to um, realize that although other people may view them as a black sheep, I don't believe God deems them as a black sheep, right? God knows that we're going to do things wrong because we're not perfect people, right? And because we're not perfect people, he gives us a level of grace to become, that decent living person. So if I was a person that was a black sheep, I would find myself probably reading my Bible more and understanding it for myself, and learning more about the Bible to help me connect with exactly what's going on in my life. Because I guess because I'm a Christian, so I'm from America, so the way we see things could be different because I'm not a Mormon. I'm a Christian, so my answer would be more from a non-Mormon perspective. So I don't know if you want to hear my response.
Sure, we like to hear it.
Okay. So from a Christian, if a Christian for me felt that they were the black sheep of their family, I would say God does not consider you the black sheep. I would say Jesus died for you because he knew that you would not be perfect. He knew that you would make mistakes. He knew that. That's why he died. He died because he wanted to allow himself to be the ultimate sacrifice for the sins that we may commit in the future. So if you believe divorce is a sin, you know, ask God for forgiveness, get better next time, or whatever what has caused the outcome, and move on and ask God for forgiveness, and that's it. You have to um free your own self, free your own mind, be at peace within yourself. Once you make a decision, if you make a decision to divorce, that's a decision that, guess what, God knew you were going to make that decision from the foundation of this world. Before he created you, he knew that that this was going to be the outcome of our life. He know exactly what we're going to do in our life before we do it. So this didn't catch you. This may have caught you off as a surprise, but it didn't catch Jesus or your higher power as a surprise. He knows it all, right? He knows it all. So I would say if you feel like you're the black sheep of the family, you got to find your own conviction and your own way of finding peace outside of the people who may feel as if you are the black sheep or you should be shunned. You have to um, be at peace with knowing that you feel that you made the best decision for your life. And if people choose it, if they choose to, label you as the black sheep and maybe not want to deal with you, then guess what? Maybe that's not the population of people that you need to be associated with in anyway. And I'm just telling you from an American Christian perspective. God knew that the outcome was going to be the way that it is. God knew that we were going to make mistakes, and he's going to forgive our mistakes. Even after divorce, guess what? You're going to make a mistake again in the future. Why? You may offend somebody. Guess what? That's a sin. You may, every everything that goes against what Christ or God would desire for you. And if you're not doing that, that's a sin, right? But God knew that he sacrificed himself because he knew that we would make mistakes. So relieve yourself of that weight and of that frustration, because you can repent and you can start again. You can repent and you can start again. Ending your life isn't the answer to anything, because it's people who care about you. You have maybe kids that, would be hurt if something were to happen to you. Your future is so bright. God has great things in store for you. And so push yourself beyond overly caring about the people who have shunned you, and focus on the people who have embraced you. And that's your close family, your kids, focus on the people who have kept in your community versus those who have chosen to, push you away.
Okay.
And that's just the American viewpoint of this.
Sure. Well, sounds well. Well, friends, we had the opportunity of making this interview with Dottie Edwards. She wrote this book, Bipolar Power. You can buy her book in her website, doriandzoe.com. I am presenting the website here. So we are very thankful because we understand a little bit better about all the conflicts that comes within us, the
Mm-hmm.
conflicts that we may have, but how Jesus can heal all the sinful things that we may have and heal ourselves. So I'm giving Dottie Edwards one last statement here before we go and say hello for the next time.
Okay.
So please, Dottie, tell us about your book and your final thoughts about bipolar power.
Okay. Well, just want to say that my book is, open for sale. It's open for sale because I think that it was created my life. Although I have mental illness, I think God allowed me to survive this life, and that He allowed me to be able to write my story, write my life, so that somebody like you can live. He allowed
Okay.
me he allowed me to my life to be the way that it is, so that I can write a book so that it can help somebody else to live, because suicide is not the answer. There is positivity on the other side of this pandemic. Things will get better after the pandemic. Things were well before the pandemic, things will be well after the pandemic, but we have to believe that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Dottie. Well, friends, this is it for today. I'm going to share this video with all my students, and we hope to see you in doriandsoy.com. So thank you for joining us, and see you next time. Bye
Thank you.
bye.
Enjoy your day.
Bye bye.